Welcome back to Akamai TV. I'm Nelson Rodriguez. If you watch a sporting event online, then you're one of many millions of people who enjoy being connected to others while they're watching.
By the sort of performance mindset that digital has
spent
brought.
a lot of their professional careers making it possible for everyone all over the world to enjoy those experiences. We're joined today by Peter Radmacher and Johannes Franken from HBS. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Nelson.
Thank you, Nelson.
I would love it if you could explain for the audience a little bit about HBS.
Sure. HBS is Host Broadcast Services. We are a host broadcast and we are appointed by big sporting federations to produce the TV signals and the digital signals on their behalf for their licensees. While we started with doing exclusively TV, that spun up into the digital environment, and my very first project was the World Cup in Germany in 2006, where we for the very first time produced, we had a new media project and we produced video for mobile phones, and back in the days those have been not really smartphones. We produced videos of that size. And we expected people to pay for those services, and we've been super excited about it. It was an amazing project. Looking back, I think times have changed and technology evolved significantly, and now it became more a commodity.
10 or 12 years ago, 10 or 12 years ago is that time you're describing. It was not a core part of any broadcaster's business to distribute video online, right? It was an experiment, and I think I've even heard you mention that it was funded by marketing budgets, but now a sizable portion of the audience expects to consume live sporting events online.
Absolutely, and I think that's the big transition that we can see. We had at the big sport event this summer, at the World Cup this year, we know that in certain territories up to 20% have been consuming the World Cup exclusively online. And that is a number that is not insignificant anymore. From being a niche funded by marketing budgets, it became a way of consuming football, and there is a generation that is predominantly consuming on digital devices.
Something that I find really interesting about the work that HBS does is you've got audiences all over the world, and you have to build a scalable platform, right? So you've got this multilateral platform that has to work in a consistent, scalable way, otherwise it's probably not really a great investment, and yet you've got to solve problems for individual broadcast conditions, individual network conditions. Talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, that's one of the biggest challenge of this project, right? So you produce centralized in one place. The World Cup always, for now, happens in one country. So all the TV signals are coming together at one place. In this case, it was in Moscow. And from there, we produce our digital signals, and then we send it to the world, right? And then it's consumed by people on all continents. And that's a challenge of itself, because we're talking about long distance delivery of video files. We are talking about still the need of a low latency signal, because no one, as my colleague said, no one accepts a bad picture quality or a stream which is minutes behind real time. And then, as you mentioned it, in every country you have different network conditions. So the network in South America is completely different to the one in North America, but still they want to consume the same TV signal. And that's a huge challenge. And in first place, you can't solve that on your own, right? You need partners such as Akamai or our other partners to tackle these challenges, because you don't have to know how the network works in every country. You can't. So you need to rely, or you need to work, let's say, with people together who know every country, who know the details of every continent and the challenge they have. For instance, and it's different for live and what a little bit, but for VOD, I would say nowadays for a global project of that scale, one origin location is not enough, right? I mean, it works maybe then for this one continent, or for North America and for Europe it can work pretty well, but we have a lot of consumers in South America, in Asia, or in Australia as well.
I think people, when they talk about broadcasters or OTC services, often there's a clear distinction between live and VOD. And for you, there's actually a close relationship.
Yes.
So the live to VOD workflow is actually quite important. Talk about that a little bit.
Yes, so what we believe is that on sports, of course, live matters, right? So the live stream is the most important asset such an event has. Every minute that passes after such an event, before you publish the VOD asset, it loses value, right? So for us, there was no question of say how long can it take, how long is acceptable. So for us, no second or none was acceptable. So for us, it has to be immediate. Right after the live event, we published the VOD asset of the full match, and you could watch the replay again, because that's the moment the viewer want to watch some specific scenes, a goal, a good save again, but not days after. Some people will, but we're talking about really a limited amount of people. The true value of such an asset is right after the match, and therefore the VOD asset has to be available immediately, and with the workflow we built together with our partners, we could achieve that, and that was working very well.
Yeah, it's interesting because the VOD asset has a shelf life. In the context of live sport, the long tail really gets very thin quickly, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah. So you talked to me a little bit about the process of setting up for a big live sporting event, and I think about arriving here at IBC a day early. That felt really, we got to be there a day early, and maybe we've got to stay an extra day later just to set this up. Yes. I think you've had a more complex experience than that. Talk to me a little bit about that.
For us, the planning of an event of the size of a World Cup starts around 3 years before the tournament itself. In the digital world, that is a very long time span, and back in that moment, we make a projection and try to anticipate what type of technology is going to be relevant for the audience then, to make the end viewer experience at home better and to bring it closer to the market. There's no point in developing technology for the sake of technology. It only makes sense if the global audience is big enough. So about 3 years before we start identifying what is relevant in the market, we speak to the larger rights holders and try to identify who is following which trend. From that on, we start to design our workflows. We identify partners that we build them partnerships up with and implement those processes. We had a big event that we could use to validate our workflows. That was in the summer of 2017, the Confederations Cup in Russia as well, where we could use the majority of our partners to prove to the world that the chosen technology is working. It gave us the opportunity to identify problems and to fine-tune it, because the challenge in live sports, especially on event basis, is that you need to perform on day one. There is very little build-up, and if you miss the first match, you missed the first match.
Yeah, and that's not a great experience for anybody. There's going to be a lot of stress.
No.
Yeah, and you talk about planning 3 years in advance, but you're putting people on the ground in some cases 3 years in advance, right?
No, that's absolutely correct. We are, for big events, we have small local offices that we are opening to get in a very close relationship with the local organizing committee, with companies and partners that are based locally in the territory. So to establish that relationship long term is very important for us. Mm-hmm. In the same way as we have those partnerships in the digital landscape, which are most of those partners are more operating in the cloud, and therefore the need for us to be on the ground that early is not that imminent. But we nurture those relationships very long because it's very relevant for us. HBS is a very small organization. We have around 70 permanent employees, but we are growing up to 3,500 people. And we can only do that through this network of partners that we have and that we care for, and that is very important to us.
How do you manage the technological change that happens around you? Particularly if we think about this live to VOD, for example, formats are constantly changing, right? So you're planning 3 years ahead. You've got assets that may live months later, and in some cases for really big matches may live for years. And yet the formats around you are constantly shifting. You're trying to build, in some ways, a permanent foundation on sand, right? How do you manage that?
I mean, this time, this World Cup, we were in the lucky position that we could serve all our customers with just one format, which was HLS. That was good. 2014 it was different and might be different next World Cup or throughout the next years. Basically, we try to simplify everything in first place. We either sacrifice a smaller platform, not serving it, before introducing too many formats. Because the most important thing for us is quality and performance, meaning end user performance, so they can watch everything and it's a reliable system. So we rather stay with one format, a little bit more conservative, where we can reach the majority of people, than introducing a lot of formats. Mm-hmm. But of course, we're looking very much into it, is the upcoming of CMAF or OMAF, so that we can, in the future, with one source format, serve into different formats. That's very important for us, because doing it now with one format, such as HLS, was a big improvement compared to 2014, where we had smooth and HLS, and we're not intending to go back to that, right? It really helps us to simplify the system and to focus on our core services or our core interests, and that's quality of viewer experience, and not technique for the sake of, or technology for the sake of technology. So we don't want to go back to multiple formats. It can be multiple formats then on the device or in the at the very last step in the player, but let's say throughout the content creation, we definitely want to move into the direction going into one source format, and then if then there's a need for HLS and Dash, we can do that then in the player or with different manifests, but we are not intending to go back to a world where we have to produce two formats.
I think as an underlying principle, we follow the needs of our customers and their customers. When we establish new products like the social media services that have been introduced this year, we looked for the dominant platforms and where are our customers present. That was primarily determining the production format that we chose. We tried to achieve the highest level of compatibility with the best technology feasible solution.
How do you track viewer experience? Because we know that's the key, right? But how do you, particularly at a global scale, how do you do that?
It's a huge challenge, and it's key, I agree. We have implemented QoS monitoring tools inside of the client, but we also had, let's say, generic monitoring system, probe-based monitoring system outside in the world, because it's two things. It's a very complicated story, because it's not only having these tools in place, but it's the capability of understanding what the tools are showing you, what it means, right? What does a red button in my monitoring tool mean? What does it mean if the QoS system shows a spike here and there? It doesn't necessarily always mean that something bad happened, right? And that's very complicated, I have to say, and that's a huge challenge. We had the tools in place, and we worked very well with them, but basically it's a combination of both, because sometimes you need to have the probe-based system in place to validate what's really happening in your QoS, or to better understand what's happening, or the other way around. You see something in your probe-based system, which could mean, there could be an issue, but then you compare it with your QoS system from the client side, and you see, there is no issue. So it has to be a combination of both. One is not enough. And the two big challenges are, first, getting it into all the devices and all platforms. That's a challenge for the client-side analytics. And then having the right people and the right expertise to really work with these data. Because, you have to keep in mind, it's an event-based setup, right? We cannot gather experience with our setup for years and then understand what everything means. The monitoring tools need to help us from day one on, and that's the challenge.
Here on the show floor, we're showing off low latency example. In fact, this is being streamed, and it's taking 1.5 seconds from camera to showing up on this monitor over here. So it's going through the encoder, it's going up to Akamai, coming back down. At some level, we're at a place where the technology is going to start to seem almost boring, right? Like the problems are so heavily solved. Obviously, the problems will never be permanently solved, but at some level, we're going to get to a point where we say, well, it actually just works all the time.
Well, I think I'm fairly certain that the moment we reach that point, someone is going to invent a new feature that is creating new headaches. I'm very much looking forward to reach that point. I think significant improvement has been made when I compare And when we compare those 4-year cycle, it's every time it's a new innovation. There's new technology. There hasn't been a single World Cup where we did the same that we did the last time. And over those iterations, we can see a significant improvement in quality and the demand for that quality. What has been errors or glitches that have been totally acceptable in 2014 are absolutely not acceptable from a 2018's view. And I'm very certain that within 2022, glitches that we had in 2018 are not acceptable anymore. So I think our mission on the technical and product side is to be very careful to understand how this notion is going and what the general expectation on quality of an OTT service is.
Speaking of quality and pushing the limits of the technology, I know that you, particularly for the most recent World Cup, you pushed the limits of the bitrate ladder, particularly compared to what some other folks are able to do. I'd love for you to talk a little bit about that.
Yes, for us, the World Cup is always a good opportunity to do such things. Quality, of course, matters. That means viewer experience, and that means a few things. It means you don't want to have any rebuffering, right? You want to have low latency, but of course you want to have a nice picture as well. Yeah. So it's not only about serving a very bad picture quality. I think you can do nowadays at scale and with low latency, but that's not the goal.
Right.
And especially if what you said, that at one day nobody will think about that there could be an issue anymore, should become true, then we need also to have the same quality than the current technology in use, and that's TV. Right? We can't just say, okay, oh, now it's working very well, but the picture quality is bad. Yeah. No one would accept that. So we try to push into a direction where we, let's say, reach a similar quality experience for our end users. And especially what we did is we established a full end-to-end 1080p production chain. So from the signal in the stadium to the end viewer on his OTT device, it was a full chain of 1080 50p. And the change to 1080 50p is a big one because you have twice the amount of pictures, but it really matters. It improves the quality dramatically, and the viewer experience is really better on sports, especially on football or on soccer, like you would say in the States. But with 1080 50p, it comes as well the challenge. You need to spend more bandwidth on it, right? You need to have a higher bitrate for that to serve the same quality than you did with 2050p. So, and with that, then we had to push up the bitrate ladder. But for us, it was the right decision because we believe the signal we sent out, or our highest renditions, they were really comparable with a TV signal, or let's say, depending on the region of the world, sometimes even better.
Yeah, I think they exceeded the TV quality in some areas significantly.
What was the top end of the bitrate ladder?
6.5.
6.5, yeah. That's quite high. And how do you balance, I mean, you're having to balance in that case latency and the buffer and the bit rate up, very high bit rate, and you're talking about bandwidth. How do you balance that?
That is for us, it is primarily out of conversations with our customers. Because we need to understand how the local market is reacting to it, and as we are serving on behalf of the Federation, we are serving all their licensees. So it is a trade-off. While in certain markets we probably could have gone even higher, our job is to find a balance across them, and a fair balance where we say this is an appropriate technical setup that is serving all the markets in a fair and balanced way. So it's a lot of conversations. It is a lot of long-time relationships with the technical leads in those organizations, and then it's our partners that bring in their experience.
But one thing is very important. We would have, let's say, never sacrificed the stability of the system just for the sake of having a lower latency. We wanted that deeply because we think our customers want that, and they told us that they want that, and their viewers want it as well. But we would have never done it with not our partners backing us up on that and assuring us that, okay, the systems are ready, we can lower the latency without endangering anything. That was very important for us because that's first place, the stream needs to work, and we need to be live all the time.
Right.
All the other things come afterwards, even if they're very important. But first thing is always quality and stability.
Right. You can't
important.
sacrifice robustness to try to push to the top end. Yeah. I know that you've also been experimenting with other innovations. Particularly, we talked a little bit about VR. I would love it if you talked a little about that. I know that many sporting events are still exploring this experience, and that, interestingly, adds more technical challenge. Describe that.
I think for us the opportunity, and that was roughly 4 years back when we start that cycle and when we look into the market and at those shows and look around and see what is a new technology that is coming up. And then when we developed the first concept, how a virtual reality experience could bring a World Cup closer to those who don't have the chance to go there, we thought that this could be a great opportunity to get people closer and to get fans closer to the action on the pitch. With the agreement of the federation and especially the demand from the broadcasters, we were happy to start to investigate technical solutions, and there we stumbled on a couple of challenges, and maybe you want to speak about the bandwidth.
Sure. I mean, the VR, everyone now in the industry has seen some VR, mainly VOD of course, but I mentioned it at the beginning again, live matters on sports. So VOD production of VR is important, and the VOD assets have a huge value on the VR production, but of course it's very important to have a live production as well.
Yeah.
And the live production simply brings the challenge with it that we are talking about a 4K signal in the beginning. So the camera is recording a 4K signal, and then you at a minimum want to stream something such as HD, so 1080-50p or even higher. So we ended up streaming, I think our highest rendition was 2050-60 times whatever. And that means you need even more than the 6.5 megabits I've mentioned before.
Right.
And serving such a high bitrate on a global scale is really a challenge of itself. That's a huge challenge, because if that would be very easy, I don't think there would be any TV or let's say traditional TV distribution service on the market anymore, because it would be easy to send 15 megabits around the globe from one point, then we would be in the future you described before already, right?
Yeah,
so that's a challenge, and to achieve that, what we did simply is we tested as much as possible and as early as possible with our partners, and we changed and tuned the system more or less on a daily basis. So we looked at the configurations for our LiveWatch infrastructure, for the delivery. We did tests with our probe-based system. We measured the performance, we analyzed it, and then we took action to improve it. And then we did it again and again, iteration over iteration. And that's the only thing you can do. It still is a challenge, and there are regions where it doesn't work that you send the highest bitrate from one point in the world to that region, because it's very far away, and we're talking about all the challenges long distance delivery brings with it. But let's say in a huge part of the world, you really can already deliver a high quality and a high bitrate also for VR, and that's then a huge step forward, because as Johannes mentioned, then you have the opportunity to bring viewers into the stadiums, because we had this virtual launch, people could watch the game, switch between different camera angles behind the goal. So in case of a penalty shootout, for instance, it can be right behind the goalkeeper, and watching that live, and next steps is then watching that live together with your friends. That's a huge thing.
Yeah, and the ability to do that is core to your business anyway, right? Even as it's an experiment that serves your core business, which is the ability to do what we were talking about, balance high bit rates with low latency and robustness.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah. I would love it if you shared with the viewers what got you into this industry in the first place? What got you into video and deciding to do this, particularly when so many years ago it didn't seem like such a realistic place to be?
Good question. Was there streaming when you started? No, just kidding.
It was streaming. It was very early days. It was primarily MMS services. Does anybody remember what those were? And we send out still images, and that was the most imminent form of news delivery, where we took out 3 still images out of an existing feed and sent those to mobile phones, who most of them probably had black and white screens back in the time. But I think for me, the excitement of getting a sports event to a lot of people, to scale it, and to scale it beyond television reception, that I think is the motivation and the driver. And with VR, as an example for technical innovation, when we did the first test and when we installed a 360 camera in the player tunnel, and you as a viewer had the experience of standing in the middle between the teams while they are lining up, and you can feel the tension in the tunnel before the players go on pitch. When I had that experience, it reminded me why I'm doing that job, because bringing those moments closer to people who can't be there is the driver.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree more. So producing live sport is really a satisfying thing, right? And being involved in this project, with all the pressure that comes with it, but then in the end, if everything works and as a team you have achieved such a thing, that's really satisfying, and that these are memories that you keep forever, and that's what keeps us going and pushing forward the boundaries in the industry, because that's really satisfying.
Yeah.
That's the interesting part about the job, really.
Yeah, an exciting thing about the work we all do is the idea of the kid with his mobile phone sitting in Rio watching something that you helped do, or somebody sitting with their mates in a pub in London watching something that you helped them see. I think that's pretty exciting.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you guys for being on the show. I really appreciate you sharing your insights and your time.
Thank you very much for the invitation. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Akamai TV will be right back. We're streaming live from IBC 2018.